Ryan Day is ranked number 2 by CBS Sports, and Sherrone Moore is 52. But that all hangs on winning or losing one particular game. Welcome to Michigan Football at the Voice of College Football. I am Cliff, your host. With me, as always, is Mac. And we're looking at the CBS Sports 2024 Power 4 Coach Rankings, and it has some surprises for Big Ten football fans. For example, PJ Fleck at Minnesota drops from 24 to 39 this year after going 6-7 and winning their bowl game. Big Ten newcomer Jed Fish of Washington sees his ranking jump from 61 all the way to 31. Likewise, newcomer Dan Lanning of Oregon jumps from 36 to 9. But we've seen this before with Penn State and Nebraska, where the pundits said when they came in, they were going to dominate the Big Ten, and that didn't happen. But we want to look at three coaches in particular. Luke Fickell, starting his second year at Wisconsin, has dropped from 9 to 17 after a 7-6 season with a bowl game loss to LSU. Mac, is that drop to 17 too much, or does it make sense? What do you think?
I think it's too much. Actually, I do. I think it's silly that they dropped Luke Fickell from 9 to 17. I mean, so the guy, and remember, we're talking coaching stock, right? So this doesn't necessarily have, or this isn't just about last season. This is about their collective work. And a part of his collective work is the fact that he took Cincinnati to the CFP. I mean, it's the first time a group of 5 team has been to the playoffs. And now, obviously, with all the restructuring and stuff like that, that's not going to happen again because we don't have the group of 5 anymore. And then he inherits a Wisconsin roster in need of some rebuilding and predictably doesn't do so well. I don't understand why that means that they have to drop him this far in the rankings because of that. It was one season. Overall, his coaching stock should still be fairly high, in my opinion. I suppose if he would consistently perform not so great at Wisconsin, then yeah, he probably should be dropped at that point. But what's interesting to me is the idea that, if Ryan Day, and we'll talk about this in a second, but if Ryan Day were to get fired after this season, would that push Luke Fickell to accepting the Ohio State job? Because if Luke Fickell has a bad season at Wisconsin and his coaching stock does start to drop, does that force him to panic and then take another job, whether that's Ohio State or even somewhere else?
Well, let's jump to Ryan Day then, who is currently 56-8 overall, 2-4 in bowl games, 1-3 in the CFP, but has 3 consecutive losses to arch rival Michigan. Still, he jumps 6 spots from number 8 to number 2. His rise should be a no-brainer with a record like 56-8, but the specter of Michigan hangs over him like this nightmare that we Michigan fans all love and appreciate. Mac, if he loses to Michigan again, is that enough for him to drop in the rankings or even get fired, as you mentioned earlier?
It's still crazy to me that we're talking about a guy who's 56-8, 56-8, and yet he's on the hot seat. Like, okay, I get it. He's lost to Michigan 3 times. He already has a loss to Sherrone Moore, even, which is just a crazy reality that we live in. And I love it. I love every bit of it. But he really should not be on the hot seat. Okay, any reasonable person, even a Michigan fan, will tell you that Ryan Day should not be on the hot seat. And I also don't think that his coaching stock should drop. I don't think that he should be up at 2. I don't think that he should have risen all the way to number 2 from number 8. And I understand that I just said that one season should not make or break a coach's stock. But the way they ended 2023 was kind of abysmal. So I don't think that he should have gone all the way up to number 2. Maybe he should have stayed around number 8. I actually think, given the way they ended 2023, number 8 is probably a really good place to leave him. I don't know why they increased him. That shocks me almost as much as the fact that some people consider him to be on the hot seat. They say that this is sort of a make or break season for Ryan Day. Honestly, I thought last season was the make or break, but either way, I don't think it should be. If it is, though, I mean, if it is, it's hard to see how this results in anything less than his resignation should he lose to Michigan again.
Jumping back though to Luke Fickell, and you mentioned, as we've talked about, that Luke Fickell might be looking at that Ohio State job opening, potential Ohio State job opening as something for him. But if his stock falls, and if he panics at Wisconsin, is Ohio State even likely to look at him?
I don't know. actually. It would depend on a couple of factors. It would depend on whether or not Luke Fickell told his agent to reach out to Ohio State and tell them that he has interest. It would depend on how desperate Ohio State is to make sure that they get someone and get someone quickly, especially an Ohio State guy. As of right now, the only reason I think it would be Luke Fickell is because I can't think of anyone else. And that's not to say that there isn't anyone else. That's just to say that I don't know who it would be. To me, Luke Fickell seems like the likely successor, provided they don't, go like 0 and 12 or something this season.
Which seems unlikely. I mean, with the premier program at Ohio State, I know that I was thinking that too. That Luke Fickell is definitely going to be looking at that job, and it may even be. I guess what I would see is that Luke Fickell is going to do very well at Wisconsin this year. If he does very well at Wisconsin this year, if Ryan Day does poorly at Ohio State or just loses that Michigan game, if they're looking to push Ryan Day out, and if Luke Fickell is looking good, he might ditch Wisconsin for Ohio State. But Ohio State is a premier program, right? So they're going to have, if that job opening happens, if that job becomes open, there's going to be a lot of big coaches who are going to be vying for that spot. I got to believe that's true.
I don't know. I mean, I suppose there should be. Logic would say that there should be. Um, But yeah, I guess I don't know. I do think though that even if Wisconsin doesn't have a stellar year this year, that Luke Fickell is still the guy that Ohio State would want to look at first because he didn't exactly inherit the best situation at Wisconsin. He would, however, inherit a loaded roster at Ohio State. And if he could do something semi competent with it, then honestly, he might end up having as much success as Ryan Day. So who knows?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. It's going to be an interesting season for those guys. But finally, we've got Sherrone Moore of Michigan, first time head coach, even though he's already 4-0 at Michigan. He enters the rankings at 52. He led the most recent win against Ohio State. What do you think of him being ranked at 52? Is he riding on Harbaugh's coattails, or is that all Sherrone?
It might be a little of both. I mean, sure, Harbaugh was there. He was at least in the building for the 4 games that Sherrone Moore was coaching for. Well, not in the big house, but he was coaching the team up until game day. And so Harbaugh was still there, but Sherrone Moore was the one who had to make the in-game adaptations to make sure that they won the game. Sherrone Moore is the one that says we're going to run the ball 30 some odd times against Penn State because it was working, and so you have to give him credit for that. I'm excited that Moore is getting credit for those 4 wins he had because I do think that a lot of the credit should go to him for those wins, and he was the logical choice to succeed Harbaugh. The article brings that up, but it also mentions something that I'm really interested to see play out. So the article mentions that Sherrone Moore is relinquishing play calling duties to Kurt Campbell, who is the new offensive coordinator. He was the former quarterbacks coach, while Sherrone Moore takes on more of a CEO type role. So what I'm curious about is whether or not Sherrone Moore will fully embrace that, since he was more hands-on with the offense last season. So will he be okay with taking a step back and being more of a general manager, more of a CEO, and having the hands-off type of approach this time around? That's that's what I think made Harbaugh such a good coach, was the fact that he was able to step into more of a general manager, CEO type of role, and maybe it actually kind of hurt him at first because he wasn't as personable to his players, but once he figured that out after the 2020 season, everything changed. For Sherrone Moore, I actually wonder if it's going to be the exact opposite, where he wants to be more directly involved with his players because he was up until now, um, and he wants to be more involved with the in-game tactical movements. But now he's going to need to take a step back into the CEO role and let the staff that he's assembled execute the game plan. Can he do that? I'll be curious to see.
Well, and that's where I think a lot of people, maybe rivals in that in particular, think that Michigan got a slow start because they think that Sharon has had to rebuild an entire staff, but he didn't really have to, did he? A lot of the staff is developed from last year, the last 3 years, right?
Yeah, the staff is developed, the players are developed. I know they brought in a bunch of transfer portal additions in the last week or so, but most of the players were on the roster last year and are still there. So you had to do a lot to continue recruiting those guys to keep them on the roster. And then, yeah, I mean, everyone on the staff was most like 90% of the staff that they have this year was on staff last year. Wink Martindale being one of the notable exceptions, but one of the few exceptions. So yeah, really, it's. I heard it described once as from the outside looking in, it's like everything has changed, but when you really go into Schembechler Hall, nothing has changed.
Well, yeah, and it's what I find interesting is that we look at Harbaugh and we think, okay, if you look at the last 3 years, here is this incredible championship winning coach. But the first 4 years at Michigan were awful. Well, not awful. I shouldn't say awful. They were mediocre. It was
Yeah,
not what we expected, and he had to get the right support staff in place in order to become the championship coach that he is.
right.
So, yeah, it's interesting to me as to how much does the support staff bolster the ranking of the head coach, and I think it's pretty significant. So it's again, when we're looking at Ryan Day, we're looking at Luke Fickle. If they're dropping in the rankings, or next year, if Ryan Day happens to drop in the rankings, is that because he still doesn't have the staff to make Ohio State the championship level team that Urban Meyer and Tressel were able to do?
That's a really good point. How much does the staff factor into the head coach's stock? And I would say that it's
Mhm.
on the head coach to make sure that he's got the right staff, but he can only bring in, or he doesn't know that his staff sucks until all of a sudden his staff sucks. Like, we can go back to the Don Brown era of Michigan when he was the DC, and say like, oh well, it was clearly Don Brown's defenses that were losing to Ohio State, and that's true. But it was also Jim Harbaugh that brought in Don Brown. But of course, you can't put it on all on Harbaugh because Harbaugh didn't know that Don Brown wasn't going to make in-game adjustments. It's who's to blame. What comes first, the chicken or the egg? The defensive coordinator who blitzes too much, or the head coach that hired him in the first place? So it's interesting. I mean, it is interesting to know whether or not a staff has that much of an effect on a coach's perceived stock. But at the end of the day, it still comes down to the coach to make the necessary adjustments for the team to succeed.
I feel like we should get our Star Wars reference in there. Who's more foolish, the fool or the fool who follows him? That's what we think. What do you think about it? What do you think Luke Fickle, Ryan Day, and Sherrone Moore are going to do this next year? Are their rankings going to go up? Their rankings going to go down? Will Ryan Day still be coaching at Ohio State next year? Frankly, will Sherrone Moore still be coaching? Will Luke Fickle still be coaching at Wisconsin? It's all kind of up in the air. This is going to be a fantastic, fascinating, and wild season this year with the way everything's changing. Drop a comment, like, subscribe. Check out all of the channels on the Voice of College Football Network. You can also catch us live on the Big Ten Team Rivalry Show Monday nights at 8 right here on YouTube. Mac, take us out.
This is Michigan football on the Voice of College Football.